I used to work in the oceanographic branch in NASA. Not many people even know we had one. Most think it's all space, but for a while, some of us were tasked with deep-sea research. There's overlap in the technology used in both spaces. Pressure environments, life support systems, autonomous robotics. Same problems, different direction. Both barely explored and could hold fascinating discoveries. You get the picture. The ocean is still the least explored terrain we've got. You've probably heard the Mariana Trench is the deepest point. It's not. Not really. There are cave systems down there, massive ones that aren't publicly mapped. Some go miles deeper than Challenger Deep. We don't have the submarines that reach the bottom of them yet. At least, not the kind that come back. Anyway, this was a few years ago. We were brought in on a joint operation with a private energy firm. Oil rig out in the Indian Ocean had reported structural damage to one of the deep-set anchors. No quake. No known underwater landslides, just twisted, sheared metal about 12,000 feet down. They sent a few remotely operated vehicles but didn't find much. The company pushed for a manned dive. They said they needed to know if their infrastructure was compromised. My team was overseeing the biology side. It's a standard protocol if something unknown is involved. We weren't expecting much, maybe a few species of crab or something mundane like that. A boring report. 3 divers went down in a DSRV. That's a deep submergence rescue vehicle, for those who don't know. They were self-contained. The plan was for the 2 to exit and inspect the damaged sections, and for the other one to stay in the pod. They were equipped with body cams, oxygen reserves, and handheld sonar, all standard gear. At first, the footage was uneventful. Poor visibility due to sediment clouds. They reached the damaged site about 20 minutes in. That's when things started to go sideways. First driver reports something odd about the struts. Clean shears, no corrosion, and not pressure stress. Said it looked like something cut the steel. We paused playback, took stills, and managed to confirm it later on. Whatever hit the rig had precision. Then something moves behind him. Not a shadow, anything super prominent, just a shift in the water. The onboard sonar pings once and then shorts. The camera shows it before the lights cut out. Blue-black skin, mottled, really hard to make out in low light. Tentacles, more than 2. Too big to be anything documented. Not a squid, not a giant octopus. This thing was organized. Second driver tries to back away. You can hear the panic starting. He says something about suction cups. Then his mic cuts out completely. The lights flicker back out, but just briefly. One of the arms is pulling at his fins. The other's wrapped around his tank. It's deliberate. The creature knows what it's doing. It knows exactly what to aim for. One driver screams. It is garbled, but the tone is unmistakable. Pure terror. By the time the deep submergence rescue vehicle pilot activates the emergency recall, the 2 outside divers are gone. One made it back. He said one of them used bioluminescent flashes to blind him. Another creature grabbed the second diver from behind and crushed his rebreather. The guy who survived only did so by activating a flare, which is not standard issue. It scared them off temporarily. Bought him enough time to get back into the pod and trigger an ascent. We pulled him out 2 hours later. He was hypoxic and had borderline shock. He didn't make eye contact for days. NASA filed the report. The company shut the dive project down within the week. Internal review called it equipment failure. We were told not to speak to press or external agencies. I didn't push it. A couple months later, after the dive project shut down, I got pulled onto something else. Black Site Project. Not NASA-led specifically, but we were there for biology again. There were definitely ties to NASA, just not any you could publicly trace. That's beside the point, I suppose. It was supposed to be routine. Assist in analysis of recovered shipwreck data off the coast of Brazil. Naval asset, historical interest. Turns out the ship was the USS Cyclops. Disappeared in 1918. No distress call and no debris. You've probably heard of it if you've ever looked into naval disappearances. One of the biggest unsolved losses in US Navy history. Over 300 crew never found a trace. Until now. The wreck was located at an extreme depth of over 16,000 feet. Way deeper than the trench it was supposed to be sailing over. We weren't told how it was found. When we arrived, they already had some of the rediscovered materials in a pressure-sealed facility. Mostly just rusted junk, hull fragments, navigation tools, and a ballast, things like that. But the important piece was a section of the bridge log, water damaged but partially legible. We were amazed any of it had survived at all. It's incredibly unlikely, but there are records of other things surviving for years under the water in shipwrecks. We went through it page by page. One entry caught everyone off guard. Dated 4 days before the ship went missing. Describes an unidentified biological contact shadowing the vessel at night. Multiple entities. Description was vague, but one detail stuck. The ink note that read, like squids, but wrong. Another entry describes a night attack. Massive hull damage from below. Crew reporting tentacles breaching the deck railings. Then, total silence. Next few pages are smudged beyond recovery. No formal conclusion. We thought it might be embellished, sailors under stress, maybe hallucinating, but then we reviewed the remote-operated vehicle footage of the wreck. Manual had a breach on the underside. Not from explosions, and not a pressure implosion. Something tore through the steel plating. Edges bent inward, like claws or tools. From beneath, most telling though, were the lifeboats. Still intact, untouched, but there were scratch marks on the inside rails. Deep ones, and handprints. Whatever hit that ship didn't get anyone time to launch, or pull them back in after they did. One of the biologists on site brought up a theory, said it might be the same cephalopods from Montserrat. Not a new species, but an old one. Maybe one we'd only just started noticing because we were finally going deep enough. Said they'd evolved alongside us, learned around us. Then maybe they'd seen ships for generations, but this one wasn't some accident of proximity. These events involving Montserrat and Cyclops, they weren't random. Both occurred at extreme depths, with no natural predators in the area. Both involved coordinated and high intelligence behavior, and both ended in total loss, except for the single survivor from Montserrat. That diver, by the way, disappeared not long after. Packed up, no forwarding address. Family says they haven't heard from him since. NASA shut our division down the following fiscal quarter. Most of the team got transferred to unrelated projects. A few left entirely. No reason given. Just an internal memo that said strategic pivot towards space-based exploration priorities. I have one more from before the shutdown that I wasn't really sure about sharing, but I suppose I may as well at this point. We're about 90 miles east of Raoul Island, on a rented Norwegian vessel, when we dropped the capsule. Third trial of the month. The water was calm, overcast sky, light wind. Standard deployment. Capsule was designed to freefall to depth. Rest on the seafloor for 12 hours, then jettison, ballast, and ascend. No propulsion, no signal beacons. Only a low-frequency ping that helped us locate it on return. Had one 4K low-light optical camera, 3 hydrophones, a small biological sampler, and a magnetic anomaly detector, which had given us false positives on previous dives. We monitored the descent. At about 6,000 meters, visual was already mostly gone. We expected that. The thermocline had been steeped, and we were getting audio artifacts from turbulence above. Pretty normal. At 7,000 meters, it pinged anomaly. We logged it. We went about our day. 9 hours in, we started picking up anomalies. Not dramatic, just strange. The hydrophones recorded what sounded like metallic creaks, distant thuds, and something like sand or grit sliding across the capsule's casing. We initially thought it might have settled onto an unstable ledge. Then the ping shifted. It started returning out of sync. We thought it was a ballast issue at first, but then it stopped altogether. No signal, no ping, nothing. We prepared a backup capsule to deploy a locator. Figured maybe DE3 had just shifted position and its antenna was damaged. Then, 13 hours after initial drop, the original signal returned. It returned suddenly and with perfect strength. That shouldn't have been possible. The feed came back online, and the visual came with it. What we saw didn't make sense. The camera was angled up. That was already wrong. It was mounted front-facing, not upward. The field of view was murky, heavy particulates, but illuminated by the capsule's low-beam LEDs. Then, something passed across the frame. Not swam, it passed. It had structure, geometry, corners. There are no corners at the bottom of the ocean. It looked like part of a man-made surface, maybe pitted steel or something like that. But it was heavily encrusted, covered in marine growth I didn't recognize. One of the junior researchers said it looked like a hole. I didn't agree. I've seen wrecks. This wasn't that. And then we saw a face. It wasn't a face in the literal sense. No eyes, no nose, nothing human. But the shape, the symmetry, the slow movement towards the lens. It triggered every pattern recognition reflex in us. Something was looking. It stayed for 7 seconds. Then the camera went black. No signal again. We recovered the capsule 18 hours later. Had jettisoned ballast on schedule. Drifted up in silence and bobbed at the surface 2 kilometers from the drop point. It was intact. We opened it on deck. Inside, the camera was cracked. There were scratches. Long, smooth gouges on the titanium shell. Not like from rock. More like something with regular spacing. The biological sampler contained organic residue, the usual krill detritus, plus something else. Black, fibrous tissue. No match in the database. Not fungal, not vertebrate. It was wrong. The spectrograph read it as carbon-based, but the chain structures were unstable, almost melted. NASA shut down the test line down within a week. One of the interns on the deployment left the program entirely. Said she couldn't sleep. Said she kept dreaming in static. There was a project called SAROS, not public. Internally, it stood for Subaquatic Remote Observation System, though I've heard a few different definitions over the years. Most of the hardware was from NASA JPL, but the budget came from the alphabet soup of other agencies. We weren't told who signed off. We weren't told what to build. The design brief was clear. Long duration seafloor surveillance, no tethers, full black box capability, and no EM leakage. It had to disappear from the world and watch silently for a minimum of 2 years. They gave us the coordinates, South Pacific, nowhere near any trench, ridge, or known anomaly, just empty blue on the map. Deployment was classified. Half our team wasn't allowed near the ship. I went only because I was on the systems check team. We dropped Saros in the calm sea under full overcast, no fanfare, no launch sequence. It just sank. We weren't supposed to hear anything back for months. 3 weeks later, I was pulled into a side lab in Building 31. Not a conference room, not a logged or scheduled thing. Just a senior guy I didn't know, one engineer from the Saros nav team, and 2 people who never gave their names. They had footage. The first clip was static, just long, unbroken shots of seafloor, sparse particulates drifting past. Occasionally, something like sediment movement in the distance. Very normal. But then it cut to timestamp 03/12/46/09. Something flickered across the screen. It was slow and purposeful, like something crawling, but not with limbs, more like dragging itself across the camera's field of view, just at the edge of visibility. Not an animal. It was much too angular. They enhanced the frame and showed it again. It looked like a piece of machinery. Very old and covered in corrosion, but it was moving. There was no propulsion. It moved like a crab, but far too heavy. Left impressions in the silt as it passed. Straight lines, not erratic movement like regular wildlife. It stopped in front of the Saros lens and sat there for 6 hours. Then one by one, its lights came on. 5 small red points spaced in a row, equidistant, all pointed directly into the camera. There was no power source we could detect. No thermal change, no emissions, just light. Then the audio kicked in. Saros was supposed to run a passive sonar 24/7, but what came through wasn't sonar. It was garbled and slow and modulated like old tape. The arguments over what this sound was probably are still going on. Some of the team thought it sounded like speech. To me, I couldn't really hear much, but maybe it was my old ears failing me. They said it sounded like, "You're not the first," and then silence. Seems a little too unbelievable to me personally. There's nothing that suggests anything in the ocean could transmit a signal like that, let alone mimic human speech. Weird creatures and erratic behavior I can buy. But this is where I draw the line and don't indulge in the fantasy. I'm only sharing and including this part because I know you guys like this kind of stuff. Anyway, after we heard whatever it was, they just told us we hadn't seen it, and the footage was being transferred. That Saros was lost during descent, that if we mentioned this, we'd be in violation of national security protocols. All I can say on the matter is that the machine, whatever it was, wasn't built by anything we've cataloged.